Hello and welcome. In this chapter, we are going to look at the English attack itself, one of the most popular setups against the knight across all the levels, and it's played by a lot of amateurs and also played a lot at the top level, and it's always in fashion at the highest level. You know, different variations of the knight they have their own peaks in popularity, but the English attack throughout the years has always been around. And it's been developed really a lot in the last maybe 30 years or so. And let's just jump straight into it. It's going to be a big and exciting chapter. E4, c5, knight f3, d6, d4 takes cd4, knight d4, knight f6, knight c3, a6, and bishop e3. As I've mentioned, f3 leads to the same position after e5, knight b3. For example, bishop to e6 here, bishop e3, and bishop e7. The same thing happens after bishop e3, e5, knight b3 here. We play bishop e7. This is our move order, as you remember. It's important for our sidelines. And after f3, we play bishop to e6. Here, g4 is bad, as I mentioned in the introduction chapter to the bishop e3 systems. g4 is bad because of d5. White is not in time with g5 because of d4 counterpunch in the center, and after g6, bishop f6. White will lose the piece after all, and we have a perfect position, a lot of dark squares. This is just very bad for white. g4 is bad. White has to start with queen d2. This is the correct order. And here I propose this trendy move h5. Now h5 in general has been around already for many years, but h5 with a bishop on e7, that is a relatively fresh setup, and it just got speed now, and there appeared games of very strong players, and even Magnus Carlsen has used it with the black pieces after facing it actually against Dingliren with the white pieces. So there are a lot of developments, and I've had this variation prepared for a long time, and I'm happy to share some new ideas here with you. There are three moves I would like to discuss here. Long castle, the natural logical idea to immediately castle knight d5, very principled move as well, and the flexible and the tricky sideline bishop e2. We can start with long castle, and now we play knight d7. This is a serious tabia that can occur also from other variation. For example, after bishop e6, f3, now h5. This is a little bit different because, as we know, after knight d5, bishop takes d5, e takes d5. Bishop later can get developed to g7. But if white plays here queen d2, after knight b7, long castle, and now bishop e7, we are back to the same system as in our bishop e7 variation. So this is relevant also for people who play this system, and I suspect most of you will follow my recommendation, but I imagine some of the viewers have already played neither maybe for a few years, and they they play this other system, but then this also is very relevant for them. So bishop e7, f3, bishop e6, queen d2, h5, and now a long castle, knight b7, king b1. King b1 is by far the most universal and the most useful move. So white should play it immediately and choose from one of the different plans on the next move. I should mention knight d5 though. Now after knight takes d5, e takes d5, bishop f5. Black's doing very well, and the idea is that once we trade the bishop on f5, and white should trade it, because otherwise after rook c8, the bishop combined with the rook will give white king a lot of trouble, as the c2 pawn will hang. And after bishop d3, we take queen d3, and now we trade the other bishop too with bishop g5. And once the bishops are gone in this position, black is very comfortable, and white doesn't have any strong attack on the king side. And well, we have only one light piece that we need to deploy, and we can either bring the knight to c5 after rook c8, or sometimes bring it to f6, hitting the d5 pawn. So a very comfortable position for black. King b1 is universally played here, and here already black has a choice. Now there are three different moves here that sometimes intertranspose to each other, and they're all useful moves on the queen side. So it is b5, very straightforward. Obviously, one of the moves we'd like to make. Also rook c8, bringing the rook to c file, or a queen c7. There is some merit in starting with each and one of them, but I will recommend the move rook c8. I'll briefly explain why. So b5 first has only one disadvantage. b5 is the move we want to be making at some point, but the disadvantage of starting with it is that white has the move knight d5. Now after bishop d5, e d5, knight b6, the c6 square is a little bit weakened, and after takes on b6, queen b6, knight a5, white brings the knight to c6. And although this position is fine, I have studied it as well, it is easier to avoid it from black's point of view. And queen c7, it has a point, and especially if white plays it slowly, there are some ideas that black might want to push b5 before, and then later a5, a4, and the rook could be useful on a8 as well. So it has some points, but against the h4 bishop g5 setup, queen is not necessarily better placed on c7 than on d8. So here after h4, rook c8, bishop g5, b5, a3, we have a slightly different position than the one we will study with the queen on d8. And we'll, it's different, as castle here is made by g4, and in general against the h4 bishop g5 setup, which is quite venomous, I prefer to keep the queen on d8 for the time being. So that is why I recommend move rook c8. Now there are a lot of different options and plans. So white cannot push g4 so easily, and that makes him do something else. It is quite naive to try and push for g4 anyway, like for example with the idea g3 followed by h3, and then wasting one more move on the rook g1 or bishop d3, and then going for g4 after all, because it would just take way too much time, and black would already be very fast with b5 before. Instead, white has different ways of still trying to develop his initiative, and one of the plans is to go, for example, for let me remove first all the other arrows. One of the plans is to go for f4 eventually, and there is this idea with h4, bishop g5, and a few others. So let's look at all of them one by one. So h3, white can start with this. Now we play b5, bishop d3, and now h4, blocking the g4 push, and after f4, queen c7, we transpose to the variation arising after 12 f4. Same story happens with the other move for the bishop d3. We go here b5, h3. Again, when white is ready to push g4, we go h4 and block that. And then after f4, again, c7, we are in that same tabia. We'll look again after 12 move f4. Then there is the move g3. The move is not too bad, but not with the idea of h3 and then g4. That will be slow, so I will play b5. Now h3 is far too slow. We play knight b6, already threatening b4 and knight c4 and knight a4, all these moves, and the white needs one more move to push g4. He's not ready even now. So this g4 idea, sort of just forget it basically with the white pieces. But after b5, knight d5 is decent. Levon Aronian played it. And the point is now, if you take with the bishop, there's some bishop h3 sometimes in the position. But you can take with the knight. Pawn takes in bishop f5. And after bishop d3, take on d3, queen d3. And white's idea is that now bishop g5 is met by f4, but it is still unclear. And after castle, rook at g1. This happened in Levon Aronian against Maxime Shulagraf with a different move order, but still there is this position. And here Maxime played queen c7, queen c4. Sensible plan, but bishop g5 is also very comfortable. After f4, we go bishop h6. And the bishop is pretty decent on h6. The king is feeling a lot more secure with the defender around it. And whenever white moves his f-pawn, then the bishops will likely trade. So g3 not a problem. And knight d5. Knight d5 is not so great. With the pawn still on b7, we can play even bishop takes d5, e d5, knight b6, winning the pawn when white can sacrifice it, but black has a good version, not having played g6, as opposed to the other system, which I'll briefly show you now. Again, this bishop e6, f3, h5, queen d2, knight d7, knight d5, bishop d5, ed, g6, long castle, and knight b6. So this pawn sacrifice here, in the position we were discussing, we didn't need to spend time on the move g6. So knight d5 is, first of all, not good because of that, but also because of knight takes d5, simply e d5, bishop f5, and after bishop d3, we again take on bishop g5. We've discussed similar position without including rook c8, king b1, but basically it's the same thing. Here white can dodge the trade, but the bishop is just very active on g5, and we can play queen c7, developing the queen to the c file, c3, short castle. And we want to push on the queen side with b5, grab the space on the king side with f5. And if white gets too carried away trying to win our h5 pawn, then after bishop h6, queen takes h6, a5, we'll have lots of play. And as you can see, losing the h5 pawn did not really affect us all too badly. The files on the king side are still very closed, and that's much more important than having this h5 or not having this h5 pawn. Whereas the king on g8 is pretty safe here because of the closed files on the king side. On the queen side, we do have a strong play. a4, a3 is the threat. So b5 is coming. The queen is far away from the king, and here black is doing very well. Knight d5 is not a clever move, and that's why we start with rook c8 and not with b5. There is this h4 bishop g5 idea, and it was played against me actually very recently. Well, recently from the time I'm recording this series, so in just December 2020, against Wei in the Danzhou online tournament. I had this line, he played h4, but what he didn't know is that I prepared this chapter just a few days before that, and I remembered the variations very well and managed to find all the right moves in the rapid game. So after h4, we do go b5. The idea is bishop g5, and now white's point is that he has established this pawn h4, bishop on g5, and after we castle, at some point he wants to push for g4. So castle, and now g4 first is a bit premature. We take, and play bishop takes g4, rook e1, b4 when the knight is under attack, and if the knight goes, we have a5, a4 coming in. And instead of g4, white should start with a3, and this is the position that was reached also in my game against Wei. There are, by the way, different move orders white can also start with, sometimes with a3, and so it is a position you should be aware of regardless of the move order. But here there are two ways of playing, and I played the main line that I recommend here against Wei with rook e8, a very strong waiting move, useful waiting move. But also possible is the idea of Paravan with knight b6. David Paravan, very creative grandmaster from Russia. And after a bishop f6, he took with the bishop, gave up the d6 pawn. In general, I should, by the way, say that the point of bishop g5, besides just placing the bishop on an active square, is to, in fact, address this idea of knight b6, because knight b6 is a threat that we had here. We wanted to play a knight to b6 and then threaten b4 and knight c4 and these active ideas. But bishop g5 sort of prevents it, as after knight b6, white wants to take on f6. Nevertheless, David Paravan played exactly that, knight b6, and after bishop f6, queen takes d6. He played a very strong move, bishop to e7, and in the end game, black has a very good compensation thanks to this dark square control because of the dark square bishop, and so often these three pawns cannot do much damage against the two. White cannot create a passed pawn here at all, and black has just very good compensation thanks to the bishop pair and some counterplay on the king side. Pawn h4 is a little bit weak. And what is even more spectacular is if after bishop e7, white takes queen e5, then black plays knight d7. After queen takes h5, rook takes c3. It's a very beautiful exchange sacrifice, and you can definitely study it on your own if you're interested. but this is the extra option. In general, I want to recommend rook e8. Rook e8, very good move in general in many of these neither positions. When we've made all our useful moves and we're looking for one, then rook e8 is that extra useful move. And here in the complications, as we will see, the rook on the e file will just come in very, very handy. Now, g4 is the whole point. If white plays g3, slower move, then we can play queen b6. Knight b6 ideas were taken out because the bishop takes f6, but queen b6 is still there, and now we want to push with b4. And even here we can see that sometimes after b4, ab, queen b4, then it is nice that our bishop on this one is protected, so the rook on e8 is doing a pretty good job. After g4, move 15, very sharp position arises, and that was also the attempt of VE, but fortunately I remembered my course by heart still. I took on g4, fg4, bishop g4. Very often when your opponent sacrifices material, you have to grab it and then hope for the best. So that's what we do. Rook e1 is what white plays, reinforcing the e4 pawn. And now white is hoping to get enough time for some attack on the open g file, rook g1, putting pressure along the open file. But we strike very quickly back to d5 and opening this bishop, preparing before opening all sorts of files and diagonals. And now complications are leading to good position for black. If e takes d5, we push b4, a before bishop before. The spin is very, very annoying. And we want to ruin his pawn structure with bishop takes c3. This is just very good for black. Knight takes d5 is better. That's what VE also played. Now we take on d5, e takes d5, and we start some counterplay against the c2 pawn with bishop f5. White has to play bishop d3, and now we hit with e4. Here, VE played knight d4. If white takes with the bishop, we just take on g5, hg, and bishop. Sorry, rook e4. White is not in time to switch over to the h file because we will take on e1 and distract his rook. That's why it's important to take with the rook. Instead of bishop e4, white can take with the rook on e4. Now we take, and now taking is dangerous because of queen h2, and there will be some trouble along the h file. But we have knight b6. It's pretty good move. It's not the only move. As I say in the notes, there are options, but this is pretty good move. The example line is queen d3, and now rook c4. We give back some material, give back the exchange to simplify the position. After knight d2, we take on e4, knight e4, queen d5. And having clarified the situation, we have a comfortable endgame with equal pawns and pretty safe king here, with the queen being so active, chasing the other queen for the trade. The main line after e4 is knight d4. That was also the main try of VE, and here I had to pay a small price for not having annotated the move bishop takes g5. And here I started to think and wonder whether I should take on g5 first or on d3, and it took me some time to figure out what is the difference. Unfortunately, I managed, but I'll explain that to you so that you don't have to go through the same problems that I went through. So ed3 first is losing because of, well, it's not losing in itself, but it's not as good because after knight f5, now bishop takes g5 would be losing, and that is because white has a strong intermezzo, so rook takes e8, queen takes e8, and now queen g5. And after dc, can play, for example, king to c1, I believe, and there is a threat of queen g7, but more importantly also a threat of knight e7, and with that white is winning some material. So ed3 is wrong, and that's why we have to first take on g5, which is somewhat counterintuitive. We open the h file, but it is important to do so to avoid this queen takes g5 business. Now after hg, we can go ed, and here it took me a little bit of time also to figure out what happened after rook e8, queen e8, and now queen h2. But now after queen h2, of course, the point is that after dc, and let's say king comes to a2, we can also promote to the knight. Basically, let's say promote to the knight, king to a1. Basically, the point is that we have f6 move, which is very important, and the king has the room on f7. And so queen h2 is not quite working, and that's why white is not in time to pose problems. He can take knight takes f5, d takes c2 and king a2. And here I made a funny joke in the text of the chapter, but it was not so funny during my game, because I said that queen h2 is not a threat because of c1 knight. But if you have set the auto queen and play an online game, then you can also defend with c1 queen, rook c1, queen c1, and the position is equal. But I have decided to untag the auto queen during the game, and I played move queen e4. And after queen h2, I did. No, you see, not working. Alt, maybe. Wait. I don't know how to promote to the knight. Well, anyway, knight. I'm promoted to the knight, king a1, and I gave knight b3 check, king a2, knight c1 check. But indeed, you don't have to promote to the knight. You can just promote to the queen, move a go, and after x1 or so, and so on. Have a fine equal endgame. That is actually an important line, and 12 h4 that we covered. Now let's go for f4. Again, we'll look at the position that can arise from different orders: h3, bishop d3, or bishop d3, h3. We can start with f4, so b5. Now f5, we obviously always have bishop c4. Bishop d3, we can play queen c7, useful move, and after h3, h4, we transpose to this important tie bet that we're going to discuss. If white plays a3 here instead of h3, move 14, we can take on f4, bishop f4, knight e5, knight d4 castle, and this type of position is always very unclear, but we have the plan of rook b8, b4, and target the white king, whereas white is also going to try something on the king side. He's got these squares on f5 and d5 that he'll try to use, but in general, this gives black pretty good counterplay. Now let's look at the tabby after h3, move 13, queen c7, bishop d3, h4. One or the other, we have reached this position, and now there are a few options. First of all, we want to play knight b6 next. In general, the position revolves around this knight b6 idea here. Now that the rook is on c8, that's our main plan. And here, white is going to try and address that. After a3, we have knight b6. f5, we have the bishop c4 move, which is the usual option. But here, with knight on b6, we have the extra option of knight c4, which is pretty good. After bishop c4, bishop bishop g5, we are starting some counterplay with a5. And after bishop f6, g takes f6, we threaten b4, and it's very important that knight d5 is not ideal, because after takes, there is queen takes c2 in the end. And that is for 15a3. Now there are two moves with which white can stop knight b6 idea. One is direct move queen f2. Here there are a lot of options, and I propose the move also queen b7, sometimes intending rook takes c3, obviously. There's also b4. Now if white plays knight e2, we have a5, a4. And if white plays knight d5, we can take on d5, e d5 with the knights, or e d5, bishop a6, and bishop b7. With a very unclear position, but we should be complaining we've taken the central pawn for the side pawns. Black should be doing quite well. Instead of queen f2, the best move is 15 rook h1, or at least the most critical move. Now the point is that if we play knight b6, it's going to be met by bishop takes b6, queen takes b6, and then knight d5, and the rook will be very, very good on e1, having opened the e file and putting pressure on the e5 pawn there. So here we should castle. Here again, white has a few options, and you should understand why we make all these moves and not try to just memorize the variations, but try to see the logic. Basically, the logic is that we want to play knight b6, and after white stops that with rook h1, only then do we castle, and then in fact the move rook h1 is no longer useful at all, because the rook only is good on the e file as long as the king is on e8. So, for example, if your opponent plays a move that is not in the notes, be it, let's say, rook h1, then obviously we do not castle, because then white will have an extra tempo on these things. He will open the position with g4 and take with the rook on g3. But here we will show our understanding of the subtleties and play the move knight b6, because this was only bad with the rook on e1 because of the issue of takes on b6 and knight d5, which here is not so good because e5 pawn is no longer hanging. So we'll try to understand these finesses and the move orders. But yes, rook e1 castle. And here, let's look at the direct options. So f5, bishop c4 and g4. Very, very critical. We have to take, otherwise g5 is actually very serious. Takes rook g1. Now we have to also act fast, as white is threatening some very bad things here. On the king side, we go b4 immediately. White has two options, knight d5. We take with the knight, pawn take, and bishop h4. Very strong. Try to slow down white's play on the g file, and if bishop g5 immediately or after takes, let's say takes, and knight a5, you can include queen b5 and now bishop g5. Here we can take, and play f6, queen takes g3 and rook f7, and guarding the g7 pawn just in time with a fine position. And the same thing happens after 21, bishop g5. Again, we take, play f6, queen g3, and play rook f7. So the rook is in time to protect the pawn, and now white's play on the g-file is a lot less dangerous, and we want to play a5, a4 on the queen side with our own ideas. After 18 before, knight a2 is also there. Now we don't waste any time, we strike with d5. Obviously, we have to realize that especially when white starts this attack along the g-file, we have very little time to waste, and if you make one slow move, things can go south very quickly. So we have to be on it, be very dynamic. So play d5 in the center. Knight g3, rook f d8. Very strong move. Not only creating an X-ray along the d file, but also giving room on f8, perhaps for the bishop to defend g7, but also maybe for the king to run back to the center. Now that the center is actually pretty close here. Queen g2. Now we go king f8. I mean, although the e4 and d5 pawns have traded, the center is still pretty close, as e5 pawn is untouched. So bishop d5, knight e4. And here, this happened in two corresponding games when black can just take everything on e4 and play a5. And we have our own play on the queen side, and next we want to bring the bishop to f6 if need be. And our king is very safe on f6, the pawn on g7 is well protected. Things worked out, but we needed to know this, and this, important. Also knight d5, this idea bishop h4, and then if bishop g5, take an f6, rook f7, this is very important to know. Also, direct g4 have to be taken into account. Now, there are many different ideas from what I remember, but I propose to take on f4. This is, of course, an option we have here, which we didn't have after f5. Bishop f4 and now knight e5. Now, interestingly, once we had traded the f4 pawn, the g pawn alone cannot do too much damage. After g5, we just move the knight, and there's no real follow-up for white. And if white wins the h4 pawn, which he can sometimes do in these positions, then again, it doesn't do us much damage because the files remain closed, even if the h pawn falls. So, interesting stuff. Now, what black wants is to push b4 and start play on the queen side, and let's see how it plays out. So queen f2, rook f8. If before the knight d5 leads to some complications that were better avoided, according to my analysis. So we start rook f8, g5 we go knight h5, bishop e3, and g6. And the knight is slowing white play down a lot, and after g6 we also want to reroute the bishop to g7 sometimes. For example, after knight d4, bishop f8, we absolutely don't care about the h4 pawn, as I've mentioned. After queen h4, we have b4. Having lost the h pawn, white still doesn't quite have the attack. Here I looked at two options after b4. Knight d5 is one. Then we take on d5, e d5, knight d3, rook d3, and now simply queen c4. And if you look without light squared bishop, knight on h5 is really firmly defending the king side, and the d5 pawn is also weak. So white is not happy here. He doesn't have any good piece play, and the extra pawn doesn't play much role. We can take on d5 at any moment, and we have excellent rooks here. Also unpleasant x-ray there along the e file. Black's just doing very well. After b4, 23 knight e6 is there, f6 and knight e2. And here, very strong is bishop g7, not determining on knight d3 or knight f3 just yet. Not knight d3, knight d4, sorry, very strong knight takes d3, c takes d3, and b3. Very strong move, and creating some threats if knight b3 is lost to c2, queen takes b2, and otherwise we're threatening all sorts of things. And you should still note how knight on h5 and pawn on g6 are closing down the whole king side, and there is very little damage that white can do to our king. A very interesting set of lines here. In short, f5, bishop c4, g4, we take and b4, and against g4 first we use this extra option with e takes f4. 16a3 is also possible, and is the most played move so far in that database. Here black has a lot of decent options. a3 was obviously played as a prophylaxis against b4, and just a slow move, keeping the g4 option in reserve. But here black has time to different things, and knight c5 is the easiest. There are really a lot of different options. Knight b6, queen b7, rook of d8 has all been tried, but knight c5 is very, very straightforward. We don't do this that often, but here with a3, white has weakened the b3 knight, so knight c5 puts pressure on the knight and forces a trade. Knight c5 and now dc5, and now especially because the pawn is on a3, we threaten b4 as this hook on a3 is there, and we want to open up some files on the queen side. And after f takes e5, we play dynamic chess with b4. Now after ef6, bc3 is strong intermezzo, hitting the queen, and if white plays a bcb first, after ef, bc, this is all, I think, forced. If white plays knight e2, then we have a very strong move, knight d7. Knight takes on e5, and note that we played b4 first, so that the knight doesn't jump to d5 in one go. So like here we don't do knight d7 because knight can't come to d5. We first kick it back. And here after a bcb, ef, leads to an endgame with bc3, queen c3, queen c3, bc, and bishop f6. This is a fine endgame. Just equal the lack of one pawn for black is just not a problem at all. These pawns are very weak, and it's just a completely equal endgame. That is, I think, it for rook c8 and for the whole long castle setup. Very interesting stuff. Some lines were quite forced at the end. If you remember my game against VE, also this idea with f4, where later after rook h1 castle, white had f5 and g4. So very interesting stuff. Good to know the typical ideas, and sometimes refresh these variations and be aware of all kinds of tricks and traps, and remember how we strike back with the counterplay time and again. Now there are two other moves that we have to talk about: knight d5 and bishop e2. I will start with knight d5 first, so that I can later explain the point of the move bishop e2. So knight d5 is very direct. Now black has a choice. Bishop d5 is a little bit dubious officially, but I think it's a very interesting one game try for sure. I wanted to play it once against Levon Aronian, and I did, but he didn't go down the critical line, so I couldn't show my idea, but I will show it now. Bishop d5, e d5, knight b7. And now this can also be reached, by the way, from this other line where we start with knight b7 instead of bishop e7, and then in this very position, instead of g6, we go bishop e7. So let me just show it to you what I'm talking about. e5, knight b3, bishop e6, move 7, f3, h5, knight d5, bishop d5, ed, knight b7, queen d2. Here black can play bishop e7, and we are in the same position. Same position as just once again do it with our move order: bishop e3, e5, knight b3, bishop e7, f3, bishop e6, queen d2, h5, and knight d5, bishop d5, ed, knight b7. So here there is c4, there is long castle, and there is also bishop e2. Bishop e2 will transpose to 10 bishop e2, which we'll discuss later. 12 c4, we go a5. That's a common idea when white has c4 in this structure, with this pawn on d5 against pawns on e5 and d6. White has closed the bishop from f1 to b5. The bishop is no longer able to access that square. That's why we play a5. We are always happy to see a4, because then white can no longer push on the queen side. We can always lock it with b6, knight c5 if need be, and otherwise we're happy to push the pawn down the board with a4 and then get control over the c5 square. And again, this is only good against the pawn on c4. Let's say if that wouldn't be the case, white would have the access with the bishop to b5. So after c4 we play a5, a4, b6. And by the way, these are not so simple, these positions, because although we have a pawn majority on the king side, it doesn't necessarily mean that we dominate that side of the board. For example, often if black king is castle short and white regroups well enough, he might still open the position on the king side, and he might be fine with having the queen side closed. So the fact that we have blocked him on the queen side completely with this a5, b6 doesn't necessarily mean that we are already happy. But in this particular position, it is fine. So after bishop b3, knight c5, we take knight c5, bc. And after bishop c2, white wants to move the bishop out of the way, out of any e4 pushes, and sometimes prepare b3. We play g6. And this is, yes, one of these things that I was talking about, that we perhaps don't mind not castling, because if we do castle, it could get tricky if white pushes g4 at some point, despite that we have a pawn majority. He could easily be the one attacking with the bishops facing in our direction. So I propose to play g6, and after long castle, queen b6, b3. White's king is, of course, super safe here, but we play queen b4, and we'll, in fact, not castle short at all. We might very well castle long, and we want to trade bishops with bishop f8, bishop h6 if need be, and knight d7, f5 is also our long-term plan. So again, keep in mind that closing this pawn structure like this could be double-edged, but here we're doing very well with this long castle idea in the long run. 12 long castle is the main move, and now queen c7. Rook c7 is also a move, but my idea is queen c7. And here Levon played king b1. This is, by the way, what most people play. They get a little bit confused here, and they play king b1. This is already very inaccurate. We have knight b6. So we hit the pawn. c4 is not possible because of knight takes c4. And after queen a5, which is what Levon played and assumed would be good for him, protects the d5 pawn, hits the b6 knight. We have a very strong intermezzo, rook c8. Now we threaten queen c2, and the d1 rook is hanging, so white has to waste a move at c3. And now another strong move, bishop d8. And suddenly we are threatening, well, first of all, we protected the knight on b6, and we are threatening knight bd5, because after rook takes d5, we will have a move like queen c6, hitting the queen and the rook as well. So here, white has actually quite some serious issues. He would absolutely never like to give up this strong dark squared bishop. This is a disastrous position for white. We have all these dark squares. We'll push h4, knight h5 eventually, control these dark squares. The bishop is hitting the empty air. His pawns are very nicely backwards. White doesn't have any targets. So Levon had to give up the pawn. He just played h4. I took on d5. You can also castle first. I took on d5. Levon took on c7. After bishop c7, bishop g5. I just had an extra pawn here. White has some compensation, of course, thanks to the bishop pair, but without the queens here, black is just doing very well. And I played a little inaccurate. I castled, I believe, played a bit too straightforward. Knight e7 was a lot more precise, intending to move the knight from d7 and have the king still protect the e7 knight, and then threaten to push f6. Just the pawn here, a good position for black. After 16 knight bd5, white can sacrifice exchange with rook d5, queen c6, and rook e5. Then after de, queen e5, queen e6, queen e6, f e6, we have an endgame where white sacrifices exchange for the pawn and has some compensation. We can also avoid this with 16 castle, and after bishop g5, now take on d5. Now after rook d5, queen c6, rook e5 is no longer there, and after queen c7, we can take with the rook. and we want to play bishop e7 next, and then knight b6 untangled this way. So just a very comfortable position. One trap already there, so king b1, by far the most natural move, simply very comfortable for black, very good for black, bordering advantages for black simply. And if white plays c4, which is a very hard move to make because the king is still on the x-ray, but if white knows that he has to play c4, we have one more idea, and that is e5. We intend to push our pawn down the board, and now I play king b1. And here, I recommend to castle first, and the problem is the move order. So if we start with a4, knight c1, a3, we should not allow white to reroute his knight to c3. To c3 comfortably, because if he does so, then he will have a very good grip on the b5 square, and we lack counterplay. And after a4, knight c1 castle, white has a strong move a3, and then the knight comes via a2 again to c3, and this is a dream square for the knight. And because of that, I propose to castle first. Now, if white goes knight c1, it's very slow. We go knight b6, we hit the c4 pawn, and already white doesn't have a comfortable way of meeting it. b3, of course, is a disaster. We'll open the files on the queen side. And the point is, so after short castle, white appears to have a strong move knight a1. Now the point is that knight b6, he still has the move rook c1. The c file is not blocked. And if we play a4, he appears to have the move knight c2, intending knight a3. And in fact, if we do allow knight a3, we will lack counterplay. We really need this b5 idea. We shouldn't really allow knight on b5, because then we just lack space, and eventually white will push with g4 and break through on the king side. So it appears as though castle is too slow, but that's the whole point. After castle, knight a1, a4, knight c2, we hit him with a3. And after he takes, of course, if he doesn't take, he can play b3, but then he doesn't get the knight to b5, and then we can hit him with b5 at some point, or after, let's say, first playing rook fc8, knight c5, queen d7, bishop d8 as a regroup as well, then b5 at some point. Sorry, got overexcited there with the arrows. Yeah, b5. And the point is, of course, after knight takes a3, we do a very beautiful exchange sacrifice rook a3. And I was really thrilled to be able to play it against Levon, but unfortunately, I wasn't able to. He played king b1, which was inaccurate. But yeah, this is a very, very beautiful idea. It's never been played before, and I think it's just so incredibly spectacular. After b takes a3, rook a8, for example, we have a tremendous positional compensation for the exchange. With white b pawn leaving the b file, we have the square on c5, which is then a perfect outpost. Pawn will never appear on b4, so knight on c5 is just a dominant piece. The other knight can also join it with by d7 to make sure it's there eternally on c5. And we also have bishop f6, then access to the long diagonal. The b file is also somewhat open. The king on b1 is just tremendously weak. And despite all of this, computer still with very strong play manages to claim some small advantage for white. But I think in a practical game, and I speak here not only for amateurs or club players or aspiring professionals, but also even strong professionals, I believe in the practical game, this position is just very, very nice for black. This is the main idea. White can, of course, also try to play a3 after a4, but again, with knight not coming to b5, not being on c3, but being on a2 and then a1, sorry, and then c2, we have b5 and e4 ideas. And we should start probably with rook f8 and then find the right moment to strike with e4 and b5. Perhaps first regroup with bishop f8, g6, bishop g7, and see when we push e4. Position should be studied a lot more, but definitely a very, very, very decent idea for at least one game. So again, take with bishop, knight d7, long castle, queen c7, and after c4, which is strong, a5, king b1, and now not a4. because knight c1, and then we don't have what we want, but castle first, allow knight a1, and then a4. Interesting stuff, guys. Interesting new idea, but main line is knight takes d5. I mean, I'm in general never happy to recommend something that the engine is not entirely happy about. For example, even the exchange stack, the engine is not entirely convinced. So that's why I'll give you obviously also another option as the main move. But in terms of practical play, I think bishop d5 is perfectly fine. So knight d5, main move. e5, and now bishop f5. Now the point, as I mentioned, is that bishop d3 we can take, and we've got the extra tempo. We can play bishop g5 right away or play knight d7. Long castle bishop g5. Fine. We've seen this position before. A very fine position for black. The knight will go to c5 after rook c8 or to f6. Bishop d3 not very critical. Knight a5 is a possibility. There are two options here. Can play b6. And it's also possible to go for knight d7, and after bishop e2, go bishop h4 check, provoke the weakness, go back, or even back to e7. And if knight b7, then there is always some queen b8, knight back, and queen takes b2 complications. But much simpler is b6, I believe, is also better. I like pushing b6 with knight c1 b8, because white doesn't have to move knight c6. That's why I think knight a5, before we develop the knight to d7, is a bit premature. Knight has to go now to c4. We play knight d7. Now it's quite hard for white to do much on the queen side. After bishop e2, we go bishop h4 check. It's very important in this position to provoke this g3 weakness. If we just castled, it's then hard to get enough counterplay on the king side, hard to generate it, and it's worth it to lose a tempo, full tempo, just to provoke the g3 weakness, and so to have a clear target there. Long castle is not good. After rook c8, knight on c4 is in the way, b5 is threatened. So short castle is the way. Now we also castle short. a4, rook b8 first. Always useful to prepare for a5, knight b6 business. And after b4, it's not exactly clear for white how to follow up on the queen side, but we have a very easy plan, contrary to him, and play bishop h3. Happy to get that square. That's why we provoked g3. And after rook moves, wherever the rook moves, I chose b1 square. We play f5. And again, thanks to the g3 pawn, we've got these targets with h4 or sometimes f4. We want to bring the queen to g6 with queen e8, queen g6. I think black is the one having all the fun here. And if you don't like this position, then I guess you recommend my French course, because if you don't like this position, then knight is not for you. It's really fantastic. Okay, bishop e2. Main move, move 12. And this is an important moment, a very important moment. If we just castle, and white also castles, and we develop the knight, then white gets a very strong move, knight a5, with the grip on the queen side. And now we can no longer play b6 because of knight c6. And that means that we get cramped here with knight on a5. White goes b4, c4, prepares c5, which is pretty much inevitable in the long run. And we don't have enough counterplay here on the king side. It is possible to do the bishop h4 move, which is what Carlsen did in this position. g3, bishop e7. This is a, well, it's sort of variation, is a proper line. There are some corresponding games. Definitely worth studying as well. But it's not so simple. White can castle long, and that's the main issue I have with this. White will castle long, and then the fact that we provoke these weaknesses turns out to be a loss of time. The play obviously continues there, and it is very possible that black is fine nonetheless, but I dislike it because of that. And I propose a very strong move, a5. It's a very uncommon idea, but it's been played in some corresponding games, although I haven't seen a corresponding game that followed it up properly, but it's still been played. The idea is very simple. Of course, we want to play a4. We want to kick the knight from b3 to c1, so of course white will most likely play a4. And now the question is, why did we include these moves? We weakened the b5 square. But those who have been paying attention, they probably understood that now we can castle. And after castle, knight d7, white does not get that knight a5 grip on our position. And so he doesn't have the same queenside play which he would have without inclusion of a5, a4. And that's the basic point, and why I like this move a5. A very strong idea, and the one that hasn't yet been played on the high level. I was trying to get it on the board a few times, but never got the chance. But I'm sure myself or many of those who watch this course will get a chance, because this is one of the main tabias of the English attack. Okay, now there are a few options. Castle is just a4, knight c1 castle. The knight on c1 is very sad. We want to play knight d7, queen to a5, rook fc8. Very good position for black. 13 bishop b5 check. Doesn't have much point. If we play knight d7, white needs to play a4 anyway after castle castle. This will transpose. We have extra option of bishop d7 here after bishop b5 check, and instructive line here, that's why I'll give it. a4, castle castle, bishop b5, ab, and now a4. Hitting the knight, we're actually losing the pawn, because after queen b4, the pawn is pinned. But the arrow should go the other way around, but basically the pawn is pinned. But now the point is actually revealed. We sacrifice the pawn with knight d7, develop rook a4, queen a4. We sacrifice the pawn just for this couple extra tempi. Now bishop g5 as well. And remarkably, we have full compensation for the pawn. Somehow, these 3 pawns against this one, they have a very little practical value at this point. The knight on b3 is in the way, and the play will actually happen mostly in the center and on the king side. And so this position is just good for black. And after bishop f2, we play knight f6. The d5 pawn is currently hanging, and we have a lot of ideas like h4, knight h5, knight coming to f4. Also, rook e8, e4 is a different idea, striking in the center. And we have all these active pieces, and white is not so happy with the queen on a4, knight on b3 doing nothing. And again, very little use of this mega majority of 3 against 1, but actually nothing is happening on the queen side just yet. So not necessarily a relevant line, but say cannot stop repeating. Always good to see these ideas, because maybe not this pawn sacrifice, but some other pawn sacrifice will appear, and then you will know that sometimes you can sacrifice the pawn just for some time, and this extra pawn on the queen side can sometimes mean not very much. Main line is, however, 13 a4. We castle and knight d7. Here white has two good moves that we have to know. Obviously, the good thing about general my course or these positions is that if white makes any other move, then usually you just have a better version of the stuff we are looking at. So there are only 2 moves here that actually make sense. What black wants, if white does nothing, is of course play in the center on the king side. We might want to push the pawn to h4, maybe drop the bishop, push the pawn to f5, enjoy our majority on the king side, play in the center. Sometimes knight f6, e4 also possible. To send the knight to g4. All these ideas are definitely there. But first, white should make a move. And here he has 2 moves that are logical. One is bishop b5, grabbing that big square that we had weakened with a5. We cannot have it all, so by stopping knight a5, we did weaken this square. And also the move f4, which is very principled. Now that pawn especially is on a5, when the knight comes to d4, the weakness of the b5 square could be unpleasant for us. So f4 is a very interesting move, trying to free that d4 square for the knight. So let's look first at bishop b5. Play knight f6, c4, and now we play bishop d7. Bishop d7, very cunning move. The point is that if we play the simple move of b6, trying to stop white's play, with this direct approach, then white has a very strong idea f4. Once we trade, the knight comes via d4 to c6. That would be a disaster for us. And so instead of b6, we have to play a bit more subtle. We play bishop d7. This effectively also slows down c5 a lot. Now white has a few options. f4 here is not good. We take on b5. After cb, we have knight g4. A very strong idea and white achieved nothing on the queen side. Knight on b3 is bad. We come with bishop f6 next. a5, we also go knight g4, and again we free the f6 square for the bishop. After f5, d5, the knight on b3 remains cut out of the game. There's no d4 square, and white cannot push the pawns because after c5, we'll just lose the d5 pawn. Also, a4 push is something to keep in mind for white. Instead of f4, which is a bad move, white has two better tries. One is queen d3, been played in the correspondence game. White is trying to reroute the knight via d2 towards the center. Now we play h4, and after knight d2, we play knight h5. This is a typical way of playing. We open the space in front of the f pawn, want to push f5, want to trade on b5 and trade the other bishop with bishop g5, and get this play in the center and the king side. In general, this is pawn h4, knight h5, pawn f5, bishop g5. There is a thematic type of setup, something you will come across a lot in these knight off positions. And so queen d3, 70 rook f1 is also played. I mean, all these moves are quite slow, and our play is just a lot easier. We just want our h4, knight h5 business, whereas for white has to try to come up with something not clear with what. So h4, h3, b6. This occurred in the corresponding game Poljayev Sergeyev, and black managed to win it quite nicely. We want to play knight h5, f5, and so on, and white doesn't have clear play here. Much better things are for white after 15th f4. At least he has much clearer play and much clearer targets here. This is also a lot more critical. I think I don't expect many of your opponents who are unfamiliar with this position to figure out that f4 is the best move, but we have to be ready to face those who do, and also those who are well prepared, because f4 is a theoretical move. It's been played in many correspondence games. I don't think there have been many high-level games over the board, but in correspondence this is already quite known. And here I recommend a new approach, a very good solution, and an important revelation of mine. e4, bishop f4, and rook c8. That's the exact move order I would like to recommend. Very, very important move order. If after e4 white takes with the rook, we can play bishop g6, and the rook is quite badly placed on f4. We want to play bishop f6, bishop f6, rook e8, and play on the open e file. And better is to play with bishop takes f4, and white wants to play knight d4, and also h5 pawn is hanging for now. So we have to address that. We start here with rook c8. Main theoretical move, at least in terms of the games that have been played here, is some slow move bishop g6. But I try to get counterplay against the d5 pawn. I think this should be our approach to have dynamic play here. And so if we play it a bit slow, then white can get a nice regrouping, and due to this weak b5 square and this good knight on d4, have a good position. So I recommend rook c8. An important move. Now there are a few options. So first of all, c4 is bad. After b6, knight d4, bishop g6, white has weakened tremendously the dark squares, and we just have a very good position here, much better for black. Rook ac1 also allows a shot. Now we have bishop takes c2, rook takes c2, and queen b6. A very strong fork, strong sacrifice, check, and knight on b3 hanging. If knight d4, you can take, and if the queen gets deflected, win back the piece. So these two are not good. And there are two moves, knight d4 and c3. Knight d4, we play bishop g6. And, well, we have a few ideas, but mainly we want to develop our knight via f6 or c5. c3 is one move. In general, c3 is a pretty good move, trying to stabilize the knight and get the pawn out of the attack. Now black has two options. Knight b6 is there, knight b5, bishop e4, very complex, and a knight c5, the move I'd like to recommend. Now I look at two options. g4 is a little bit insane, but I wanted to mention it because black reacts very, very strongly. g4, 8g, bishop g4, and now bishop f6. A very strong exchange sacrifice, a point after bishop c8, queen c8, is that we don't count exchanges, but we look at the position. Our king is so much safer than the white king, and our pieces are so strong. Bishop comes to e4. We have currently a threat of bishop d4, knight b3 to regain the exchange. Knight can also come into d3. Just a very, very good positional compensation. Again, not very relevant because I don't think g4 is going to happen, but just good to know. Material can be sacrificed in the knight. Bishop b5 is the better move. Planting a very strong bishop on b5, and very importantly, taking away the e8 square. So attempting to win the fight for the open e file, but it's not so simple. We go knight e4, hitting the queen, queen e3, and bishop f6. And next, we want to fight for that e file with rook c7, rook e7 lift. Very resourceful idea. After knight f3, we play rook c7, and white has queen b6, trying to trade queens after rook e7. White can trade queens. If he chooses to play bishop e3, try to be clever, and then take on bishop b6, we will avoid the trade with queen c8, and we have a lot of play on the king side incoming with h4 and bishop f5. So queen g4, the queen on b6 is quite misplaced. Endgame is more natural. 23 queen takes d8, rook d8, and bishop e3, intending bishop b6, and now knight c5 is very strong, stopping that. And white has also issues with his d5 pawn potentially, so it's around the level endgame here. Of course, white is happy to have that b5 square as well, so it's not all too bad for him. It's simply a balanced endgame. The other move is 17c3. Now we play knight f6. We do not once again waste time on bishop g6. A slow move here. We do play bishop g6 after knight d4, but that's different. After c3, we go knight f6, and it's a lot more concrete and a lot more strong, going after the d5 pawn. White has a few moves here, and actually it's a very important position, and we have to look through all of them carefully and see what happens. This is a very critical line. I believe this is possibly White's best attempt against this line, so here black has to be quite accurate. But I've checked all the possibilities, and it seems that black is doing quite well. So let's look at the moves. So bishop e3 is one move. A very clever idea. A more tempting is to bring the knight to d4, which I will also look at. But this move is also interesting. White wants to bring the bishop to d4. We play bishop e4, bishop d4. We can take now knight takes d5. Also interesting is knight d7, by the way. There is a very beautiful line here after knight d7. That's why I included it, just to show you. Let me show you this. So bishop b5, bishop d5, queen e2. That's how White wants to regroup. Bishop takes d5, and knight takes a5. Very strong tactic. If we take on a5, White takes on d7. And here I'd like to show a very nice idea. So it's bishop f6. Queen takes h5, the bishop is attacked. Bishop d4, cd4. Now we cannot go rook c2, which would like to, but there is queen takes d5. And here we have a very, very strong idea with black. Note that the bishop is hanging, this knight is also hanging, this side is also hanging, so lots of stuff are hanging. But here we have a very strong tactical idea, is knight e5. We block the view of the queen on the bishop, and after de we have rook f2, rook f2, takes, and queen a5. And after ed we have queen b6 back, and we win back the d6 pawn with the fine position. Very nice little tactic. I just wanted to show that. Knight d7, queen e3. We also have bishop d5, rook f5, bishop b3, bishop g7 is not really working. The computer first thinks it does, but after king g7, queen g3, we have a very strong move, bishop g5. We don't want to get mated. And after rook g5, we go king f6. The king is doing just fine here on f6, and after queen e6, bishop e6. We're doing fine here. We should play bishop e6 first, and only after rook f1 take on g5, because if we take on g5 immediately, we'll get checkmate with h4, and then queen f4, obviously. So yeah, a remarkable line. Black is hanging on by a thread, but he does. And instead of knight d7, a bit more reliable is knight takes d5. There are two options. Bishop h5 is the natural one, but also bishop f3. White is trying to keep the initiative, and it's a very classy move, not trading going for the pawn, but trading the bishop. So very classy move. But we'll play bishop g5, activating the bishop, queen e2, and now we take on f3, queen takes f3, and knight f6. Everything is protected. And after queen f5, we have knight g4, threatening bishop e3. And after queen a5, rook e8. The pawn count is equal, but we have also our trumps. We want to enter with the rook. And I have all active pieces and a decent position. Queen d8, bishop d8. It's an equal endgame. We have our pawns. He has his pawns. It's equal pawns. This for bishop f3. Again, important for black not to be submissive, but be very accurate. Bishop g5 first, and then take knight f6. After bishop g5, bishop takes h5. So remove 20. We have also bishop g5. Knight f6 is also possible. Bishop to d5. It's also a decent position. We can reroute the knight via d7 to c5 or via h7 to g5. But bishop g5 is main move. I really like it. After queen e2, we want to play f5. The idea is to follow up with knight f6 and d5 and establish a very strong bishop on e4. g3, knight f6, bishop f3, and d5. Now, in all these positions, the only problem for black is this weak b5 square. But as I've mentioned already, you can't have it all. And this is something we have to give white. We give white this b5 square. But we do have our strong play in the center and good chances on the king side. So here, let's look at the following line, knight c5. Very challenging. We play queen e7. Not queen b5. We play bishop f3, rook f3, and knight g4. And queen b7, we have rook takes c5. And otherwise, we want to bring the rook from c6 over to h6 and have all sorts of ideas. Our knight on g4 looks quite formidable. I think we have a good position here. This is for bishop e3, bishop d4. Very, very tricky. Again, the knight d7 is possible, but knight d5 followed by bishop g5, f5, knight f6, d5, I think is a lot more aesthetically pleasing. Bishop f3 is another move. White is trying to reinforce the d5 pawn. Now I recommend rook e8. We keep all the options open of bishop e4, bishop g4, or knight e4. In general, trying to play on these central squares and whenever possible, try to steal the d5 pawn. White can play here two moves, knight d4 or rook a1. Knight d4, we go bishop e4. And after bishop e4, knight e4, queen e3, we go bishop f6. That's why we played rook e8. We had set up this idea that after white trades on e4 and attacks the knight, we have bishop f6, which is both activating the bishop, but also supports the knight, allows the rook to support the knight. A very, very good regroup there by black is rook e8 and bishop e4. After rook e8, rook a1, 19 is possible, and now we play bishop g4. Possible also to go bishop d7, hitting the a4 pawn, but I like bishop g4, and after bishop g4, hg. The g4 pawn is quite annoying for white, keeps this h2 pawn somewhat at bay there, and next we want to play queen d7, perhaps bishop d8. The d5 pawn is always weak. Position is around level. Now let's look at the move 18, rook a1. This is also a challenging line. It's a pretty forced line. We go bishop e4 here, hit the d5 pawn. White can play knight d4 that transposes to a line we'll look at later. c4 is critical. And now after queen b6, knight d4 compared to direct c4 after rook c8 here, situation is a little bit different. Now white has a much better setup. We have a knight already on f6 and not on c5, and our bishop is on e4 exposed. So here it's not so easy for us, but we go bishop g6 and intent knight e4, regroup the knight to c5 after all, and after bishop f3 we have a forced line rook takes c4, rook e7, rook takes d4, both capture the piece each, and now rook b7. White regains the pawn with tactics. If we take on d2, he takes on b6, so we take the rook, he takes the rook as well. And here, very strong move, queen a6. Just defend the d6 pawn and also prepare rook c8 or rook e8 with pretty decent counterplay. White does have two bishops, so let's continue the line a little bit. Rook e1 is the move, rook c8, now bishop e2. He's trying to get to our d6 pawn, but we don't worry. We go queen b7, bishop d6, and play rook d8 and we will regain the pawn after all. And our king is very safe with the bishop on g6, and so it's always very nice. We'll have plenty of counterplay against the white king that has only 2 pawns in front, while ours has 3. It is also important to note that we do play rook d8, and we don't trade queens with queen takes d5, because all these factors of a safer king is they are only relevant when queens are on the board. So that's why, in general, it's a good rule of thumb. You trade queens when your king is weaker, and when your king is safer, you try not to trade queens. 1894 is critical. The final move we should look at, and bishop e4. Also possible is bishop g6, but that is very dangerous. After bishop f3, black is fine, but we have to know, of course, sequence knight e4, bishop e4, bishop e4, rook e1, bishop d5, rook takes e7, queen e7, knight e5. Now, it looks as though we are losing after queen e4, queen d5, knight e7, white wins. So we play queen d7. Queen d5, we have rook c5. Very, very clever idea, regaining the piece. Now white takes on g7. He wants to open our king, and after king g7, it will be disaster because of bishop h6, and our bishop is hanging and rook is hanging. Now we have queen g4, very strong. Queen d5, queen g7, and black is okay, although after queen h5, rook c5, white still has a safer king and good compensation for the exchange. Bishop g6 is not my advice, but it's also okay. But the better move is bishop e4. Now white has 2 critical options, c4 and rook e1. The c4 is logical, protect the pawn. Now we go back, and white has these weaknesses here for now, so it's not so simple. But he plays bishop d3, and now we have to play it very, very strong and very concrete. Queen b6, hitting the knight on d4, bishop g6, fg. Now, although this structure is really a disaster and knight e6 could potentially be an issue, but currently his knight is pinned, and the c4 pawn is hanging. And after b3, we have knight g4. Again, very concrete. The knight is still pinned. We want to push g5. After h3, we still push g5. And the complications seem to lead to equality. And we have also the idea of bishop f6 later. Very critical line. c4, so bishop g6 and queen b6, very important. 19, rook e1 is also there. Here we take on d5 with the knight. And bishop h5 is the most natural reply. Also, bishop b5 is there. White plays for compensation after knight f4, rook e4, knight g6. White has some positional compensation thanks to his light squares and f5 and b5 squares, but we are quite solid. We want to bring the rook into the game with rook c5, rook e5, and we should be fine. More normal is after knight e5, 20 bishop h5. And now we take on f4, queen f4, and play bishop d5. The bishop is doing a great job, first of all, saving itself, but also the f7 pawn. So the bishop on h5 was attacking it. And now after knight f5, bishop f6, our bishops have secured the king. The bishop is protected the g7 pawn. And we want to play rook c5, rook c4. All sorts of ideas to activate the rook, and queen b6 check is also there if necessary. I think black is fine here. And that concludes the complications after rook c8. A lot of complications, but there is a common thread there, underlying thread in all of these lines. We are playing actively. We are trying to snatch that d5 pawn, and always play dynamic chess, trying to go for complications and not give white too much time to consolidate and regroup favorably. I think this completes the main line, but now also let's look at the move 10 bishop e2. So the point of the move bishop e2 is in fact very clever. White wants to, after knight b7, play knight d5 anyway, and here after knight takes d5, e takes d5, bishop f5, after castling, he has this move knight a5, and we are not in time to include a5, a4, which is what we did in the immediate knight d5 move. As you remember here, after 10 knight d5, we take bishop f5, bishop e2, and now we go a5. So white is trying to move order us, but we also have ideas of our own. After knight b7, knight d5, now we take with the bishop. White has already committed his bishop to e2, so this is quite different. Here we take with the bishop, and after ed, play queen c7. Queen c7 is not the only move, but it's a very clever move. we intend to play knight b6, hitting the d5 pawn, and we stop the move c4. So already here, castle would be a mistake, and my opponent made this mistake in an online game, and after knight b6, he had lost the d5 pawn because c4 can be met by knight takes c4, and after bishop takes b6, queen b6, I had the dark square bishop, which is very important in the structure. Not only do we want to play h4, knight h5, and then we dominate all these squares, but also white never has play of his own with c4, c5 because he lacks this important dark square bishop. That's the basic idea of queen c7. White, of course, shouldn't fall for it. If white plays knight a5, then we hit him with e4. It's very important. Whenever the knight comes to a5, we have this e4 idea. The problem with the e4 push is that the knight often can go towards d4. So as long as the knight is still on b3, we never want to push e4 because of knight d4. But once the knight gets deflected to a5, then we can push e4, and the weakness of the d4 square is a lot less relevant. Line continues with castle. f4 is always hit by knight g4 when we're happy to take one of the two bishops. And so white castles, then we also castle. Again, f4, there is knight g4. White plays c4. And now we continue with knight e5. We have a clear play of our own. We want to play queen to d7, rook to e8, bishop to d8, nice regroup. And white wants to play on the queen side with b4, c5. So both sides continue with their plan. Rook ac1, rook f8, b4, and now bishop d8. Very clever regroup. The opening the e file and also activating the bishop, which was otherwise passive on e7. Bishop d4, queen d7, and very pretty position. Our bishop on d8 does a good job. Now it's hitting the knight on a5, and our queen can activate itself towards h3 after ef if necessary. The rook is supporting the knight on e5, and all the pieces are very harmonious. The a8 rook will join the game via c8. We also want to push h4 and so on. It's very fine in a very complex position. This for knight a5, knight 5 e4. If white starts with 30 c4, we have a5 here. A5 is a typical response against c4. As we know, now the bishop doesn't have access to the b5 square. This push is very good. And here too, after a4, we can choose whether we go for b6 knight c5 idea or h4 instead. h4 knight h5 first and keeping b6 knight c5 in reserve. We are fighting for the dark squares on the king side here with these g3 f4 squares. And as we had seen in similar positions, we might not want to rush with castling here, and for now keep the king in the center where it's pretty safe. Instead of c4, much more cunning move is move rook c1. White is protecting the d5 pawn indirectly. After knight b6, he's then ready to go c4. The rook on c1 defends this pawn. And at the same time, now a5 here is inaccurate because of a4. And then white has, after knight b6, white has bishop b5 move with a check. So instead of a5 first, we should castle. And now white has two moves. He can castle or play a very interesting move, c4. Now, c4 is very interesting. White is trying to postpone short castle. And now we push with a5. As you know, always after c4 we can push a5. Knight a1. White immediately sends his knight on this journey to b5. Knight a1, knight c2, knight a3, knight b5 is a typical maneuver in this structure. The knight on b3 is a terrible piece, and it wants to improve itself via a1. So white starts knight a1. And here I recommend knight h7, not knight h4, knight h5, which would be a pretty good plan had white already castled. But here white can choose for a different plan. Go knight a3 first, cement the queen side with knight to b5, block any counterplay on the queen side, and then bring the king via d1, c2 to b1. And in the long run, there is some danger for us here after g4 on the king side. So h4, knight h5 would be a little bit too naive. Instead, we should go for a knight h7, more reserved plan, but also a pretty good one. After knight c2, we go queen d8. The queen has already done its job on c7. We had already closed this queen side, and the queen has no more business on c7. After queen d8, we prepare bishop g5, trading the star squared bishops. Very important, getting that c5 square. And this position is is quite unclear. After knight a3, bishop g5, knight b5, knight c5. Now white has two options. He can castle, which I believe is perhaps not the most practical. Now we go f5, and we have really a very pleasant Najdorf position, a standard Najdorf position that we should always be happy to get. We have our typical plans here with the pawn majority on the king side, 4 against 3. We want to take on e3, then push f4 first, then push e4, get these pawns going. We also have lots of other ideas, h4, h3, always there, possible to annoy white on the king side. Queen f6, rook a8, mobilizing the second rook. All these ideas are very interesting. It's a very good position for black. More cunning than 19 short castle is bishop takes g5. White keeps the king in the center, and sometimes he might want to escape via d1, c2 to the queen side. And that's what happens after knight g5, h4, knight h7, and now king d1. Very cunning idea. Here we return our knight to the center, knight f6, and after king c2 play rook e8, and after king b1, e4. It's a very strong idea. e4, we basically want to stop the move g4, because now we have e takes f3. And also, if white tries to reroute the bishop via d1 to c2, which is a common plan in the structure, we have the move knight d3 bothering this rook. So white doesn't have an easy way to continue, and otherwise we'll play queen d7 and a4, and it's a very complex position. White kings on the queen side, pretty safe for now. So is our king. But nonetheless, the kings are castled to the opposite side. Just a very complicated position. And that is for the move 14 c4. Again, very important not to fall for the h4 knight h5 plan, which can backfire after the king moves over to b1. After 14 short castle, however, we do play a5 here as well. Now here it's very important that after a4 we have a knight b6, hitting both the a4 and the d5 pawn, and it's very important that we have castled. There is no bishop b5 check, and it's also very important that we have the queen on c7, because now knight a5, there is no more knight takes b7. We can just take on d5. So a5 works out tactically here, and white has to go for c4 plan nonetheless. And here with the king castled to the king side, we can go for h4. H4, knight h5 plans. There are again different plans as well. There is the a4 bishop d8 queen a5 idea, and I believe we can still go for knight h7 queen d8 bishop g5 ideas here as well. But I think h4 knight h5 plan works out very well here. And line is also very instructive. After h4 and knight a1, we play knight h5. We're going for these dark squares. It's important to control these dark squares f4 and g3. And next we want to push the f-pawn, and after knight c2 we have a very strong regroup, a very cunning one. I was very impressed to see it. We don't just push f5, but we think of what white wants to play, and white wants to play knight a3, knight b5, bring the knight to that b5 square, and in anticipation of that we have a very strong idea, bishop d8, followed by knight c5 after knight a3, and after knight b5 we have queen e7. We have regrouped very harmoniously. The queen switched over from the queen side to the king side. The bishop from the passive e7 position is ready to find a lot of life on the a7 g1 diagonal. And here after white takes on c5, d takes c5, we have a very complex position, but a very good one for black, I believe. White has this strong protected passed d pawn that can go to d6, sometimes even to d7, but it will never be able to queen. We have firm protection of the d8 square, and next we want to play queen g5 and play on the queen side, and even after d6 we can also play queen g5 with a very good position. The lonely pawn on d6 can do us no damage. White's pieces are very passive. The bishop on e2 is passive. The knight on b5 is pretty, but it's there on b5, doing not much other than defending the d6 pawn, and there is no way white will get to queen the pawn. Meanwhile, on the center and the queen side, we have all these dark squares and this tremendous position. So I believe this is pretty good for black. Again, this important idea of queen c7 threatening knight b6. So make sure we have a trap ready for white in case he castles short. And if white doesn't with c4 or rook c1, then we go for these a5 ideas. After c4, immediately a5. After rook c1, we have to castle first, and then we want to play a5, and then it depends on whether white castles short immediately. When after a5 we go for the h4 knight h5 plan, or if white is being very cunning and postpones the short castle, then we can play it a bit more modest with knight h7, queen d8, bishop g5, and reaching this very complex position where we are not without our trumps. I think very interesting line all in all. And just to sum up briefly the whole chapter, after 9h5, 3 ways for white, we have seen long castle. There is a separate line at knight d7, king b1, rook c8 was major tabia. White has different plans. We examined all in great detail. After 10, knight d5, we have the option of taking with the bishop, which is what I played against Levon. And after ed knight d7, long castle, most critical. And now queen c7, there is this trap with king b1 and knight b6, queen a5, rook c8, the strong intermezzo, and then bishop d8. And if white knows all of that or finds the strong move c4, we have this beautiful exchange sacrifice idea with a5 and then castle first, and only after knight a1 to play a4 and knight c2, a3, and sacrifice this exchange. That was the extra option. And the main line we had after knight d5 move 10 is knight takes d5, ed bishop f5, bishop e2, and here a5, very strong move to include, not allow the knight a5 grip. And after a5, a4, castle knight d7, f4 was the most challenging, where we saw after ef, bishop f4, rook c8, all sorts of different ways black gets his counterplay against the d5 pawn. And finally, we looked also at the cunning move 10, bishop e2, with the idea that after knight d7, knight d5, taking with the knight now would be bad because of this knight a5. So we took move 11 with the bishop, and there we played on these dark squares. All in all, I think an exciting new way for black to face the English attack, and I'm sure you'll have a lot of success with it. And I'm looking forward to see this line develop. And yeah, best of luck in your games, and thank you for watching, and see you in the next chapters.